It's been a busy week, to say the least, for Penn State football and really all of college football, thanks to the opening of the transfer portal, which officially opened up Saturday, January 2nd, and will run through what? Not Saturday, it was Friday, right?
Yes, January 2nd.
Friday, January 2nd, will run through Friday, January 16th. That makes for about a 14-day window. It's much different than it's been previously because there's no spring window anymore. And considering Penn State has a new coach and has already brought in a lot of players from that coach's old employer, it's already been busy and it's going to stay busy. Joe Smeltzer, Kyle Fatman, Golik. This is a live edition of Joe and the Fat Man. And we can't get into everything that happened with Penn State football this weekend. That would just take too long. So, the short of it is Penn State has, I think, around 20 players now, as of this recording Monday night, committed from Ohio State out at a transfer portal.
You
And
mean
will
Iowa State?
Iowa
You
State,
said
yeah,
Ohio. You said Ohio State. That'd be a really good
yeah.
welcome.
Well, they might get one. James Peoples is in the portal, and he
This is
is
true.
interested in Penn State, so we shall see. But Iowa State, this is something we expected, right? Matt Campbell, coach at Iowa State. Iowa State was pretty good the past 2 years, 8-4 this year, Big 12 runner-up the year before that. So some people might be wondering why Penn State is taking from a program such as Iowa State, but Matt Campbell knows these guys. He has relationships with them. And we're not going to hit on all 20 of them, but we can talk about a few of them. The main name so far is Rocco Becht, quarterback transfer. I think when we found out right before the portal opened that Ethan Grunkemeyer had intended to enter, we probably saw where this is going, and we further saw that one literally a minute after the portal opened, midnight on Friday. It got out that Becht was, I think it was Pete Thamel that broke that Becht was visiting Penn State, and by the end of the weekend, he was committed to the Nittany Lions. So, Kyle, you wrote about Rocco Becht. What did you see from the film you watched, and what do you like or dislike about this guy?
Yeah, he was actually sought after a little bit. I think there was news that LSU was even pursuing him. So I mean, he was, a veteran quarterback is a hot commodity. So, the column that I wrote, and this was a few days prior to the portal opening, was would Rocco Becht make sense for Penn State? And a lot of my angle on that column, Joe, was under the guise that Penn State would somehow retain Ethan Grunkemeyer. And I also, coveted the potential growth Grunkemeyer could have with 2 to 3 seasons if he stayed within the program. So when I was looking at him, and I had done the profile on Taylor Mauser, who is the new offensive coordinator, and watched a bunch of Iowa State games from 2024 and 2025 here. Becht was prominently in there. He has a great anticipation, Joe, and one of the things that he has a great gift of is he has a great touch, and he's been able to place the ball where it needs to be. A friend of the show's, Landon Tangwell, did a film study on him, and one of the examples that he showed was just he threw a ball. I think it was against Colorado, but regardless of who the opponent was, he had about this much of a window, and it was a pure velocity throw, and he got it in there. That is something that we haven't seen, especially in the Franklin era. He also doesn't make a whole lot of bad decisions, but there are concerns with Rocco Becht. Number one, he's coming back from injury, so he had an injury in both shoulders. One, the cast is coming off on the non-throwing shoulder, and then he had I think a sprain or something of that nature on his throwing shoulder. They're saying that he'll be ready to go for spring, so that's going to be something we're going to do it. The big thing with Rocco is while he's a great scrambler and he does have the same traits that Trace McSorley had. The problem with him is he's not real good at getting his feet set. And when he does it, it leads to a lot of erratic throws. You know, he's not good on the deep bomb. And that's something that, you know, I Drew had a beautiful deep bomb, but unfortunately, we never leveraged it, and which, you know, Corey Geiger probably is loving me saying that right now. And I think sometimes he gets what I would call, Joe, if you've ever boxed before and you've gotten hit a few times, sometimes you get a little punch drunk and you think a punch is coming when it's not. And where I'm going with it is sometimes when when I watch when opposing pass rushes have gotten to him early and often in critical second half situations, he at times doesn't sit in the pocket long enough, abandons it. And when you look at the replay, had he waited another second or two, there was a receiver wide open for a splash play. What I will say is, and for our audiences behind the scenes, when I wrote that column, I did give it a B- grade. And at this point, I'm gonna up it a little bit, and I'm gonna go from a B- to a B, Joe. He's one of the top quarterbacks available in the portal. This is going to be a subject of a column that I'm gonna do at some point. I'm just kind of waiting for things to die down a little bit. But this Rocco Becht, bringing him in, allowing Grunkmeyer to go, and then banking on, Casey Evans and Peyton Falzone. And I can't remember the other Iowa State quarterback. His name's Alex. Help me there, Joe, on that one. But who I'm talking about,
I
right?
do.
It's just the
Yeah,
name.
Alex Mansky. I think
That's
how
it.
you pronounce it.
I didn't know if it was Mansky or Hensky, so that's on me there. But the thing is, this is what's going to be what starts the program. To me, for the Becht final grade, the true final grade, is if Penn State somehow can make the college football playoff or be in that position to be there. So if they're like 10-2 and somehow don't get in, then to me that's an A grade. But we're well far from that, and that's where I stand on it, Joe. What did you think about Becht and just basically, letting Grunkmeyer go?
Yeah, I think the dream would have been to keep Grunkemeyer and Becht and have them on the same roster. And there's a better background. I think ideally you would have had Grunk back up Rocco Becht for a full season, and then Rocco Becht is out of eligibility, and Penn State has a clear quarterback situation for 2027. But I said this before. Why would Ethan Grunkemeyer sign up for that? He started 7 games. He got better pretty much each game. We did a breakdown on last week's episode of how, it's the getting better every week cliche. Ethan Grunkemeyer did that. That wasn't a cliche. And the last game he played at Penn State ended up being the last game was, I think, his best game as a college football starter. So having him in the fold for 2027 would have been great. But, Grunkemeyer has options. And obviously, Virginia Tech ended up making the most sense, at least in his eyes, with being able to play for James Franklin and Ty Howell, who I'm sure he has some familiarity with, Danny O'Brien, who he definitely has some familiarity with. And it just makes sense. And my guess is Grunk will be the clear front runner to be a starting quarterback in the ACC, and you're going to take that over being a backup at Penn State
Oh,
any day of the week.
100%.
So, as far as Rocco Becht goes, I think some people are down on it because this year wasn't great. In fact, it was probably his worst overall season as Iowa State's starting quarterback, which he had been for 3 years. A career low in yards as a starter, 2,584. The previous 2 seasons, he was above 3,000. Only 16 touchdowns. He had 25 and 23 the previous 2 years, and he had the same amount of interceptions at 9. That he did last year. But he was also playing hurt. We know now that he had that labrum problem, which he got fixed and should be ready for spring ball, and thus he wasn't able to throw the ball as much, only 339 passes compared to 456 in 2024. But you look at 2023 and 24, Kyle, Becht was pretty good. 23 and 8 touchdown interceptions in 23, 25 and 9 touchdown interceptions in 24. And in 24, he led Iowa State to the Big 12 championship game. So this guy knows how to win. And he's going to have more talent to throw to, although he had Higgins and Noel, the two Texans receivers now in 2024, and that's losing them probably hurt him in 2025 too. But you get that mesh of guys coming from Iowa State to the Kobe Howards and Tyser Denmarks and Andrew Rappleyes that are back with Penn State, and things are shaping up pretty good, I think, for Rocco to succeed, especially with another year in Taylor Mauser's scheme.
So there's a lot of people, and I've seen this, and it's probably one of the low-hanging fruit, Joe. Ethan Grunkmeyer completed, I think, 69% of his passes this year. Julian Sain had I think 75-80% of his passes were completed this year. Dante Moore completed 70%, and Rocco Becht only completed 60%. And some people are using that as a red flag here. And I get why a lot of people are saying that, but there's a lot of context to it. So here's a stat for you. So Iowa State, do you want to know, guess the percentage, Joe, how many times they throw a screen pass in this season in a Taylor Mauser offense?
Oh boy. I'll just take a shot in the dark, like 20%.
That's what I wouldn't expect you to know. And if you know, I'd be stunned.
20%?
No. You ready for it?
Higher or lower?
Lower, much lower.
5%.
4%.
Oh, okay.
Ethan Grunkmeyer threw on all his passes this year that was considered like a screen variety 28.8% of the time on his dropbacks. So when you're seeing, you could look at Rocco Becht's 60% completion percentage and, be like, this is terrible. But conversely, when you're looking at a lot of the offense, Ethan Grunkmeyer on non-screen passes, again, is 71.2%. But when you're talking about, deep balls in whatnot, you're talking less than 20% of his passes were of intermediate to deep length. While Rocco Becht in this offense, it's pressuring and trying to push the ball downfield. So it's if you go back and you remember the Bill O'Brien days, and even, believe it or not, in the Joe Moorhead days when Trace McSorley was just trying to push that ball downfield to like Chris Godwin and Saeed Blacknall and Deshaun Hamilton, that's a little bit of what Penn State's going to get back to. It's not going to be this, we're going to be throwing a bunch of passes behind the line of scrimmage or very short passes. That's not the Iowa State offense. It's very much, if they're throwing the ball, if it's a short passes are 5 yards or more. We're a lot of Andy Kotelnick and a lot of what it was in recent years, even under Yursich and Kirk Shiraka, was a very short, high percentage passing game. And that's a lot different than, even when you look at programs like Ohio State and Oregon that I reference, even though they do throw a lot more screen passes, they still have ways of having a short to intermediate passing game where you see a high volume. And I think that's going to be interesting to see how Mauser and Campbell adjust to that, because in the Big 12, you can be explosive at times like that and get that. In the Big 10, it's very calculated. And when you're watching them, these teams like Ohio State and Oregon, it's like they're not afraid to throw to a check down. Like Julian Saint has no problem not throwing to Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith and hitting like Max Clare, the tight end, or Brandon Innes. I mean, take a look at the pick 6 against Miami. They were content of throwing a screen pass to Innes. And
Miami was all over that. That was,
most of the time. I mean, people don't pick up on it. Miami read it right and took it to the house. But that's what you see a lot of in the Big Ten. Look at in the Orange Bowl against Texas Tech. Dante Moore wasn't like overtly thrown the ball downfield much. He was taking what they were giving him, whatever the receivers were, and then he just took calculated shots. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this philosophy here in the Big Ten, Joe, translates.
Absolutely, and there's plenty of other Iowa State guys coming over to Penn State. Which ones stick out to you that aren't Rocco Becht?
Well, the tight end has to be one. Benjamin Brahmer has to be one. You look at him, you look at what happened, and that's going to, let me ask you this. Did you find it at all surprising that Penn State was able to keep, I was hoping Penn State between Rapp, Luke, and Olish, they would be able to keep two of them. Like I was convinced Rapp was here because I think he just in the last month of the season in the bowl game, he established himself as the best overall between blocking tight end and in the passing game. I had a feeling Luke would be the one that went. And then my hope was, with Mauser being Football Scoop's reigning tight end coach of the year, that would have some cachet in the program. That hurt. But getting back to it, Benjamin Brahmer I'm really looking forward to seeing what two really good tight ends, because Brahmer was a Mackey semifinalist this year. So I'm really excited for that. I'm excited to see how Carson Henson and Quentin Martin do in the backfield. So, and then the other name that I really, really have interest in on this is Marcus Neal, the safety. Still on my wish list, Joe, is Coy Parrish. Very much high on my wish list. Don't know if Penn State's going to get him, but one can dream. I mean, we all had Christmas just now. But I think Neal's going to be complement very well with those safeties and in there. But those are the big ones. I mean, the receivers are interesting, Joe, but bar none. But for me, and maybe this is me being jaded and maybe me still having, PTSD from the last several years of Penn State just not being able to do anything with any sort of wide receiver. Until these receivers prove that they can be valuable and do something, much like Trey Wallace did for Ole Miss in the bowl game.
Oh, he did.
Yes, he did. Until I see it, it's more of it's like Penn State beating Ohio State. It's a slew of other things. I got to see it to believe it. I'm hopeful. These guys seem hungry. Noah Pauley seems like a fantastic receivers coach, but for me, I'm interested. My interest is piqued because it'd be nice to see how they translate, how they work with Kobe and Tyseer. But it's more like I'll see it to believe. But the big ones, Henson, Brahmer, and Marcus Neal.
Yeah, and that's a good segue into the guys Penn State retained. I expected Kobe Howard to stay. I think the way he was used, it took longer than it should have, but the way he was eventually used by Terry Smith and Andy Kotelnicki, that's a better view, down the stretch of the season, I think that inspired confidence that Penn State wanted to keep Kobe Howard around, would do what it took to keep Kobe Howard, and that ended up happening. Tyseer Denmark, I was a little surprised by. No, it's not just because of the viral video of him leaving the field and placing his helmet in the bin while Penn State was celebrating. It's not just because of that. It's because on both sides of the ball, Kyle, right? You had Kobe Howard on offense, Quinn Martin eventually on offense, Andrew Rapplier on offense. On defense, you had guys like Alex Tash. Young players were getting a shot with Terry Smith and taking advantage of it. That didn't happen with Tyseer Denmark. Tyseer Denmark was no higher in the food chain for the Pinstripe Bowl than he was under James Franklin. So I think that that made me think he played 2 snaps against Clemson. That made me think, okay, this guy is going to be looking to move on, but they kept him around, and Tyser Denmark is very talented. And at least Marcus Hagan's told us that his work ethic had improved greatly as well. And in the Pat Kraft leaked audio tapes, not to keep bringing those up, but Tyser Denmark was mentioned as a guy that was being underutilized. So I think it's big for Penn State to have Tyser Denmark. He still has breakout capability. It hasn't happened yet. I don't think Tyser is as far along as he or maybe even Penn State wanted him to be. But having him and Kobe Howard both back, that's going to be big for Penn State, and it could be pretty big for Rocco Becht too.
Oh, 100%. And, I think Penn State, and this is going to be once the dust settles. I'll probably do like the 5 players that it hurt to lose, because again, the portal's still open for another 11 days. So these guys can do whatever between them. But I think for the most part, a lot of the essential guys have announced that they would return. There's probably a handful of guys that haven't said anything. And right now we're trying to hold on to the fingers crossed, no news is good news adage here with them, i.e. LeVar Arrington II. You look at Penn State really didn't lose. Like I think the only position group in my mind, Joe, that took like a really bad beating was the tight ends. Like you start looking around, running back, Quentin Martin is sticking around. They lost, Cam Wallace and I'm blanking on Corey Smith. But they still maintain Tyke Hayes. But then they get Carson Henson, and then they're in the running for LJ Phillips, and they're looking at James Peoples, and so I think they're going to be all right at running back. Receiver, the 2 that you wanted to hold on to, they held on to, and I mean, I'm hoping Lyric Samuel may be sticking around. He hasn't said anything yet. Offensive line, plenty of wins there. I mean, there's really not like a real bad loss. I mean, maybe Javen Williams at most. Defensive line is probably another area that, you had some nice whacks, but then you kept some key people that you definitely want. You wanted to hold on to Ty Blanding. You wanted to hold on to Yvonne Kimaju. You wanted to hold on to Max Granville, especially with Chaz Coleman leaving. Linebacker, we were hoping Rojas and Amari would be a couple, but Amari thinks he can get more, and best of luck to him. They're able to keep Rojas, and I think that was the more significant one, because he's much better at the run coverage. And you look at the secondary, you wanted to hold on to Jameer Joseph, you wanted to hold on to Darius Dixon, and Vabu Torre and Davion Collins. And you held on to Ryan Barker, who I think
that's an underrated one.
That's a very underrated one. Yep. And like after he announced he was coming back, he went on his own socials and was in Costa Rica sunbathing. So bless his heart.
Yeah, and he posted at like 4:45 in the morning the day the portal opened.
That's fantastic. Ryan Barker's my spirit animal. Like if I could come back, Joe, as anybody, I might want to come back as him. But getting back to it, so no one's, I was looking at this earlier today, Joe, and let's think about this here. It's, you do every year, and I'll probably be helping you this year for the first time, Penn State All 105, right?
Yeah.
So at around 4:00 today, Penn State sat at 92 players on the roster, between who's announced staying, who hasn't announced anything, who's coming via the portal, and then the recruiting class of 2026, between those who sign, who have yet to sign. So if everyone signs in that class and they don't have any more exits, they're at 92. You start looking at who's all, like, now I think they got their fill from Iowa State. I mean, I think Matt Campbell will take anyone from Iowa State that wants to be there, that he believes in. But I think we're going to start seeing some people that aren't Cyclones come in here. I know they had Keanu Williams in, the defensive tackle from UCLA. We just mentioned, James Peoples from Ohio State running back, and LJ Phillips from South Dakota, who had 2,000 yards. Alex McPherson, the edge rusher from Colorado. They had another DB from Colorado check in. So I think you're going to start seeing some folks, but I just want to ask you this. There's an adage, and Urban Meyer used to say this a lot. A lot of coaches said this, but Urban Meyer's the one that comes to my mind when I say this, and this is probably where my head scratches a lot. So the coaches in college used to, would always say the first 2 years is on us, i.e., we need to get you into the physical shape. We got to get you physically developed. We got to get you to learn the playbook. We got to get you ready to get onto the field. The third year's on you. So when you look at this, Joe, and you look at this adage, it was a head scratch when I started seeing like guys like Brady O'Hara and other freshmen being like, hey, I'm leaving. Like, guy, you've not even developed yet. Like it's not, I just want to put it out like this. Penn State isn't like, this program with meager resources. I think we've seen the facilities. I mean, these guys got they got some of the best stuff at their disposal. I think it blows my mind, and maybe it's just something we're going to have to learn in this new era. But to me, not everyone's body's physically ready at 18 years old to go onto a field and compete against 22, 23, even sometimes 24-year-old men.
Oh God.
So that's, I think, where my question to you, Joe, is like what do you think of that? Were those like the head scratchers to you?
I don't know. To be honest, like there's been so much going on. Like I haven't had time to really digest why a guy like Brady O'Hara was entering the transfer portal. No disrespect to Brady, he's a whippy old guy from Pittsburgh North Catholic, but he hadn't really made a name for himself at Penn State, and that's going to happen. Guys are going to leave after year one. That's just how it is. So I don't know. There could have been a lot of reasons, but. Yeah, it's hard for me to answer that because there's only so many players, like as journalists, that we could like kind of like digest what their thinking is. So.
Maybe I keep, and this isn't to pick on, Brady or any stretch. It may have not jived for him, and I get that because Penn State's large. Like, look at Alex Birchmeyer.
Yeah,
he went.
Remember, the guy who recruited these guys, Phil Troutwine, is no longer there, so that's absolutely. Nor is James Franklin.
True, but in the same vein, it goes back to the one column I wrote about, are you committed to the school or are you committed to like the coach or something? And a lot of, and I get why you'd be committed to, why do we'll take football out of the equation. Why does, Joe Blow will say, go to a certain school over another one? It could be for tuition and whatnot, but a lot of times it's what is in that program, who's teaching that program, what's the job placement of that program, etc. And sometimes I even though the teachers change with coaches, Joe, it's still Penn State, and it's still like you're going to get all 32 teams at Pro Day. You're going to get the exposure you need. I think it's just until I understand more of the dynamics of this new generation. I think a lot of us do. It's just going to be very interesting. And I think like I think this is going to be one of these, because I was listening before we got on to an interview Dan Lanning did today. And he said today's going to be, like, this year's going to be his smallest portal class. And he relied heavily on the portal his first few years, but he got his program to a point where he likes everyone on there. Everyone on there wants to be there. And I mean, he goes, we're going to have some people leave and we got to fill for that, but we're not rely heavily on it. And I think we're just entering that first few years, and I think that's the thing we got to go through. Is, what as covering it, and for our fans, it's understanding that, you know, just looking at that as a model. The portal's never 100% going to go away, but it's going to be reduced, and that's where you want it. And that's a shining example. Look at everything Lanning did in the portal his first few years. Now it's like he's like, today, I'm probably just going to go in there and get what I need, depending on who leaves. And
Yeah,
that's
and some of these younger players too, and maybe even some of the older players, you only have 105 roster spots, and the more guys you keep around, the less opportunities you have to get guys out of the portal. So there were multiple guys. I don't know who. I'm not going to name any names. That I'm sure Matt Campbell said, like, "Hey, it's probably best for you and best for us if you look elsewhere." That's absolutely happened.
Oh, I mean, especially in this day and age where they're paying them money, they're getting paid, they're looking at it and they're just saying, I think those conversations did happen. I don't want to suggest anyone because we don't know that. That would be disingenuous on our part. But the thing that I would say is, these guys that are now starting to jump into the portal, you heard me say the number earlier, 92. Grant you, I don't think there is a scholarship limit anymore in this new era, but
Probably not.
I think the artificial number, I think everyone's kind of rolling with is sticking with that 105 number because that's a number they can manage, because you can't just say we're going to have like 150 kids on this team. It's just too unwieldy. But you got to start wondering, like, I think Pezze had 40 guys going to the portal. Not
Yeah, that
everyone,
sounds about right.
they're not all going to find homes, Joe. I'm just gonna like, and
No.
that's the other thing. I was starting to look it up earlier, and I couldn't get an easy way to calculate it, so I'm going to still do it. I'd like to know, out of all the guys that left, like, what is like the true percentage that left? Like, you're never going to be able to account for potential. Like we'll pick on Brady again. Okay, he's a true freshman that decided to bounce. Okay, we don't know what he will turn into be. Okay, but for the guys that actually contributed snap wise, what was lost? Like, obviously we know what Grunkmeyer was. We know Amari Campbell led all defenders in snaps this year. So we know that's there. But you start going through that, because we wrote the articles, we put it in our tracker. Some of the guys, like, it's like what a friend of the on the beat here, Neil Rudell, put on X. It's like, I didn't even know how half these guys were still on the team, and jokingly, we do know them, but it's like you sit there and you go, like, you're on the team. Wow, like like, I literally had to go read your bio to get an article out, and I'm just sitting there going, Joe, I'm like, I'd love to know the number of, like, really what was lost, because I know people like to look at the player because it's easier to count, but I'm willing to bet if we took in the snaps, I don't think it's going to be a major percentage.
No, and I would agree with that. So, as we kind of wind down here, Kyle, what are you looking to see for the rest of this transfer portal window? Like, what do you think Penn State needs to address, and what players do you think they should attack?
Oh, okay. So Kyle's Christmas in January list here. I would love for them to get a monster D tackle. With the new defensive tackle coach, not defensive line coach, I should say, from UCLA. I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce his name because I still got to get it on the sheet, on the pronunciation sheet. He has familiarity with Keanu Williams. I'd like to see a monster defensive tackle, because how Danton Lynn's defense works, Joe, is you got to be able to have the personnel to be able to have those chameleon of formations. So if he does want to do like a 2-4-5 situation, you got to have those defensive tackles, those interior linemen that can just occupy multiple offensive linemen. So, and he's a guy I think that could do that. The more I watch this LJ Phillips from South Dakota, he averaged 7 yards. He reminds me of like a Tony Hunt kind of guy. His highlights aren't flashy, but what it is a lot of impactful runs. I would love to see some like as much defensive line help for sure. Um, I'd like to see what they do with tight end as well. I mean, I don't know if they're going to get much more in the portal this year. I'd like to see if they get something in the recruiting class. But I'd like to also see if they get that Alex McPherson from Colorado. He seems to have a lot of raw talent. And losing, if there's a guy I felt that Penn State lost in this whole grand scheme of things, and right now, if you said, Kyle, do your top 5 on which departures hurt the most, I would put Chaz Coleman at number 1.
I think most people would.
Even though he wasn't like, I know there's people on the beat that have said on their shows, like, he's not a good run defender, blah, blah, blah.
He wasn't.
He wasn't. We're not lying. I mean,
he could have became one, though.
But he will become one, and you can't. You can't sometimes teach those freakish, pass rush skills that he has. But I think Penn State needs to get more. Like the whole defensive line, I just think they could add more too. So McPherson's my hope. You know what I mean? I hope they're able to retain Eni White. I think there's something there. I know it's kind of like he doesn't know where he's going to be. Is he going to be an edge rusher? Or he's going to be an interior lineman. But I'd like to see them hold on to him and just start building around that. That's where I'm at. And then Coy Parrish. I know it's probably not going to happen, but I got to at least throw that out there. I'd love to get in, like, I don't think he was all first team this year. I know he was last year. He was a safety from Minnesota. I would love to have that sort of, game breaker at the in amongst the good defensive backs. Because I'd love to see a guy like Coy Parrish, Marcus Neal with Jameer Joseph and Darius Dixon out there. Because I think that would be the best secondary, could become the best secondary in this league.
Yeah, we'll just have to see what takes place over the next 12 days. That's going to do it for the latest Joe and the Fatman. Joe Smeltzer, Kyle Fatman Golik. The transfer portal will roll on, and we'll see you next time.
Good night, Canada.